Hi, everyone. We are moving on. We're going to be talking about Chapter 5. So last week we talked about police organization. So again, remember administration class. So we're going to go police, courts, and corrections, sort of mirroring the intro class. But now we're looking at it from an administrative perspective. So last week we did police and we looked at the organizational structure on how police are set up and how our administrators of police departments would look at that and how they would want to organize it. So this week we're moving on and we're going to talk about the actual personnel that work within the police department. And we'll touch on officers, but really in intro, we really focused on the officer. In this, we're going to look at the top of the law enforcement organization and the leadership and how we pick somebody for that position. And then the second lecture, we'll look more at the specific positions and we'll talk about the differences between the specific positions. Both of these aren't going to be super long lectures because the explanation video on how to do phase 4 will probably be a little bit longer. So I've made these two a little less so that I can focus a little bit more on explaining what you're going to do for phase 4. Okay, so I will share my PowerPoint. Hopefully it will work and you can see police personnel. So what we're going to do today, like I said, is we are going to look at law enforcement organizations. Specifically, we're going to look at the personnel and the roles and functions of the people, and mostly at the top. So we're looking at the administrators of the organization. So one of the things I want to talk about is when you have a police organization, one of the things you want to do is make it better. So if you become the boss of that organization, you want to make it the best organization you can possibly make it. So how do we make our police organizations better? And especially with all the media attention to use of force and bad rep for law enforcement, we want to improve that. We don't want that to be the reputation of law enforcement. So how do we make policing better? So my argument will be that there's two different ways you can do that. There are accrediting agencies. Those are certain organizations that have federal standards. And what happens is they come in and they evaluate your police department and make sure you meet certain criteria, certain levels, and you can better your organization by trying to meet those federal standards. And another one is choosing better leaders for your organization. So leaders really are the one that leads organizations down certain paths. So we always want to be very careful of who we're hiring as our leaders within these organizations. So that's really what we're going to talk about today in this PowerPoint, are the leaders of law enforcement organizations. So just as a review, I want to talk about administrative style. So we mentioned this before in the last class, and we talked about it in our intro class. When you look at policing departments, law enforcement departments, you can see that there are different styles. Different agencies have different styles. And you could have a watchman style is more the rough 'em, tough on crime, do what we need to stop crime type of an organization. Remember, this organization gives officers a tremendous amount of discretion. They have the ability to make choices. Sometimes they can make not so great choices that are a bad reflection on your organization. But you'll have more of a public order, stopping crime sort of mentality. Then you have the legalistic style. The legalistic style is sort of like no tolerance, zero tolerance for crime. If you see somebody breaking the law, you have to arrest them. It's not so rough and tough, but it's still, you follow the letter of the law exactly, no discretion. So don't forget that, like legalistic, you give your officers very little discretion because you're just telling them, if you see this, you must do this. So that takes away some of their discretion and their decision-making ability. And then we have the service style, and that's more along the lines of community policing, your belief that law enforcement is there for problem solving, working with the community, integrating problem solving and community together. So community policing service style is the third style. Now, the reason why I bring these up, because when you have somebody that's in charge of the law enforcement organization, what style they choose or which style they follow is going to affect the style for the whole department. So your head of your department is really going to choose sort of the tone of how that department is going to run. So if you choose a leader that's the Watchman style, that's how your department's going to be run. If you're legalistic style, that's how it's going to run. If you're more service community oriented, that's how your organization is going to be run. So the question that's the answer to this. Who decides which style is better? Well, it's the person that's in charge of the whole organization. So it's going to be the law enforcement executives. It's going to be the people at the top of the organization. So if it's a county organization, it's the sheriffs. If it's a state, it's the state police. So they're the ones that kind of set the tone and set the style for law enforcement. Okay. So when you think about that, when you're hiring somebody to be the chief administrator of your organization, you may want to give it some thought. What style would you like that department to be run by? Which style do you prefer? And you may want to look for hiring an executor, the chief of that organization, that has a similar style. So, who are the chief administrators? If it's the county, it's the sheriff. The sheriff's in charge of the whole sheriff's department. If it's a local, like city, town, or village department, it's their chief of police. Okay. If it's the New York State Troopers, it's the superintendent of the New York Police. So they just have different titles, but they're the ones that are sort of in charge of the whole organization. Okay. Now, when you're going to hire, you have to make a decision. How are you going to hire? So the first decision you make when looking at a chief administrator is, are you going to hire from outside your organization? So are you going to post it and ask for people from outside the organization to apply to the position? Or are you going to look to hire somebody that's already working within the organization? So maybe the second in command, you're going to promote that person or another person within the organization. So that's always a decision that you have to make. How do you want to hire? Now, there are pros and cons to both of these. If you hire somebody already within the organization, they already know how it works. They already know how it functions. They know the personnel. They know the community. They know all of that basic information. So then they may be able to dive in quicker and get involved much quicker pace. But then sometimes they may be entrenched in the old ways. And maybe you don't want your department to be in those old ways anymore. Maybe you want to try a new style or do something different. So maybe you want to go outside and new blood, bring new ideas, new concepts into your department. So it's not the stale old thing recycling over and over. But when you hire from outside, then you have to teach them everything they need to know. They need to get to know all the people that work there. They need to know the procedures and policies that are in place. They need to know that you're not going to be able to quickly change everything. They may not know the community or anything like that. So there's definitely pros and cons to each. So you really have to weigh which one you think would work best for your organization. Once you make that decision, then you have to actually choose who you're going to hire. So there are different ways that you can go about doing this. And one of is the traits and skills way. Okay. So one of the things that you want to do if you are hiring somebody is you want to figure out what would be the traits or skills that you would want for somebody that is in that position. Okay. So if you're going to ask to hire somebody and you need to ultimately request resumes, what are you looking for in a candidate? So traits, like what kind of traits do you want? So what kind of personality traits? Outgoing, friendly, more authoritarian? What kind of personality traits do you want? Leadership traits, are they more of a strong leader or are they hands-off leaders? So what kind of leadership traits do they have? Intelligence traits, communication traits, okay? And then you want to know what skills that they have. So you want to think about the position and what skills would a good person have to have for this position. So you want them to have some technical skills, right? You want them to know how to budget. they're going to be in charge of the budget. You want them to know how to budget. You want them to know basic policing skills. Now, there are some agencies, some sheriffs that are elected that have never been a sheriff or a law enforcement officer before. Do we want that? Do we want people that have no technical skills in the actual profession? Computer skills. Do they have computer skills? Do they know how to work certain equipment like police cars and radar detectors and breathalyzers? And then you may want to know about their human skills. How are they with interacting and communicating with other people? Are they cooperative? Are they sensitive? Are they oversensitive? Are they respectful of different genders and ethnicities and cultures? So what do you want from those human skills? And then another skill would be conceptualization. Remember, you're talking about the person's in charge of the whole organization. So they're not worried about one small thing. They have to look at the organization as a whole. And they have to be able to look at what procedures they're doing and how they're going to affect the organization as a whole. So those are conceptual skills. Picturing the bigger, looking at the bigger picture, coordinating activities for the organization as a whole. So you want somebody that can do that. Some people just don't have the ability to really see things as a whole like that. So you want to make sure you do that. Okay. So that is one of the things you want to do. Think about what kind of things that you want. Now, once you come up with those traits and skills, then you have to write a job description, because you're advertising to get people to come into this position. So you have to write it up like a summary, write it up of those traits and skills that you're looking for, because then the person looking for a job will read that and say, oh, I have those skills, and they would send their resume to that position. So not only you have to decide what traits and skills are most valuable to you, you have to then write it up in a job description and figure out how you're going to get that out to the public so people can actually apply for the position. Once you release the job description and you get resumes in, then you have to evaluate each of those resumes and compare how well they meet their traits, the traits and skills that you listed as most important. So you come up with your list, you write a job description, then you evaluate the resumes that you get to see if they satisfy the traits and skills that you're looking for. Okay. Now, sometimes, and we'll talk about this, it comes up again later, they use what's called an assessment center. So assessment center is the idea that it's really big process to do this, and maybe there's no one person in your organization that can do it. So they hire outside companies to come in and do this process for you and collect the resumes and give their recommendations. And although your organization will make the final choice, they do a lot of the legwork for you, and that's called an assessment center. Now, when you're coming up with desired traits, remember traits are this is going to come up for your homework. So that's why I'm reasserting this, so you understand what I'm going to be asking on your homework. So you're looking for desired traits, personality traits, leadership style, intelligence, communication abilities. So think about someone who has been a great leader to you. So visualize somebody that you look up to and say, this is a great leader. They do a great job leading something. What traits did they possess? So ultimately, you're going to have to come up with 5 traits that you think would be the best for a leader of a law enforcement organization. And then you have skills. So don't forget skills, education, experience, specific knowledge, technical skills like budgeting or management, or human skills, communicating with people, conceptual skills, organization, seeing the big picture. Again, think of somebody who is a great leader. What types of skills do they have? And again, you're going to want to think of the 5 top skills that you think make the best leader. Okay, so kind of think through that. What would you pick as the 5 top traits, and what would you pick as the 5 top skills? Now, in addition to the trait or leadership theory that we just talked about, so developing traits and skills and figuring out the best leader that way, there's a couple other things that you want to consider. What kind of leadership style do you want? So we talked about this in the week 2 when we talked about organizations and leaders of organizations. So we talked about there are different leadership styles. So remember, we talked about the autocratic leader. That's sort of more of like it's leader centered. It's sort of a little bit more of like a authoritarian style. You have one leader that tells everybody what to do. They don't necessarily give a lot of discretion for decision making. Oftentimes it's used best in emergency situations. It tends to be, though, much more authoritarian. And if you have the autocratic system, if you don't have that leader, the whole system kind of falls apart because you need somebody to immediately take that authority. The other thing with the autocratic leadership is it sometimes stifles development of people underneath because they don't get to make choices and work towards moving up because they're just always told what to do by the leader of the organization. The second style is the democratic style. So the democratic style is working within groups and having groups come up with ideas, eliciting ideas and support on how to best to achieve things. So you work together with a group and it's group teamwork, problem solving types of things. It's very goal oriented. They come up with goals and they want to have everybody consider all their ideas considered with reaching those goals and how it's best to reach those goals. It often works best with problem solving environments where you need a lot of problems solved and people can work together well for that. It is based on mutual respect among the people that work there, that they all work together and carry their load and all contribute to coming up with the best decision-making, problem-solving solutions. Laissez-faire is a much more hands-off approach. So gonna just let everybody do their own thing. You're not going to dictate. You're not going to tell them exactly what they need to do. You're going to let the organization run itself. So not a lot of input by the leader. The leader is just going to kind of stand back and let you do what they need to do. Oftentimes this is hard to carry out and it puts the organization in jeopardy because there's no real sort of structure that organization is following. So that's another thing that you want to consider. And then don't forget situational leadership theory is the idea that maybe you want somebody that is a more autocratic for certain situations, but is willing to switch to democratic leadership when necessary or switch to more laissez-faire when it's appropriate. So situational leadership is somebody that's going to be more flexible, not so locked into one style based on all the time. They can switch based on the situation. Now, the other thing to consider when you're hiring your chief administrator, your head of your law enforcement department, are the Mintzberg roles. So remember, we talked about Mintzberg, and we said that all CEOs or leaders of organizations have to fulfill certain roles. So they have the interpersonal role, so they're the figurehead of the organization. So you want to pick somebody that's going to present a good figurehead to the public, right? So can go out and be the face of that organization out in public. You want somebody that's going to be a strong leader for that organization and have strong leadership goals. And you want somebody that's going to be liaison duty so that they are willing to work with other agencies and work together. Informational role. You want a leader for your organization that can monitor and inspect what's happening within the organization and make sure that they're all moving towards achieving the mission of that organization. You want somebody that's going to be able to communicate and disseminate information to the people that need it so that the organization runs smoothly and on the same page because they're all sharing similar information. And you want somebody that is a spokesman so they can go out and talk to the media and the public and present a good picture for your organization. And then the last one is decision making. Don't forget that you need a strong decision maker. So somebody that's willing to look at new ideas and be an entrepreneur and bring in new concepts and ideas to your organization. Somebody that can handle disputes and negotiate with different employees if there's disputes or citizens and officers and things like that. So there's a lot of dispute resolution that you have to do. So you have to be a good negotiator, a good resource allocator, so you can figure out where the money needs to go and what's the best spending of your resources for your department. And then negotiator, because remember, law enforcement is all contracts. You have to be able to negotiate labor contracts. So when you're hiring executive, you have to consider all these things too. So it's a very complicated process. There's a lot of things to consider when you're trying to choose who would be best in that role. So we said that you come up with what you want out of traits and skills and leadership style and duties, and you come up with your list of who would make the best candidate. You advertise for that, and then you gather all of your resumes, and you get all your resumes, and then you have to go through each resume and assess those things that you have determined are the most important for hiring that person. So I mentioned the assessment center. Like I said, this is a highly complex and detailed process. So sometimes it's somebody within the organization doesn't have the time or skills or knowledge to be able to do this. So they may hire what's called an assessment center, and they may put this together, and then they would present it and people would make sure they agree. And the assessment center would really take control of a lot of these things. A lot of other things that they can do at these assessment centers, maybe you want psychological testing, so they can give some psychological testing. Maybe you want to see how well they work with other people, so you can give them group assignments and have them work together, and you can see them in action and see how well they actually work together in basket exercises or like case studies. So they can come up with scenarios and ask the candidates, how would you respond to these certain situations? So you can get a better understanding of how well they actually satisfy the traits and skills that you've identified. You could ask for writing samples to make sure they're good communicators in writing. You could require them to do role playing. So these assessment centers can do all of these things, so you can assess all of these different criteria when you're evaluating each of your candidates. So hopefully you can pick the best candidate to fit the skills and traits and leadership styles that you think are most important for your organizations. So think about it, like what additional things does this give you? Like, so if you're just reading up a piece of paper about somebody, how could these things really contribute to the knowledge that you have about that person? How could they help you in making the best decision? Once you have all your resumes, then you can start to narrow down those resumes to a smaller group of people, because you could get hundreds of resumes. You have to narrow that down to a smaller group of people, and then ultimately you would conduct an interview. So then you would talk to the person and see how well they communicate, ask them questions, how they respond, and you can get a better picture of the person, meeting them in person during an interview. So now you have the job. So you go through that process to hire somebody, and now somebody has the job. So they are the leader of the organization. So once you're the leader, how are you going to act? What are you going to do? You walk into this organization, and now you're in charge of that whole organization. How are you going to handle that situation? So there's this quote, Machiavelli came up with this just desserts quote, and this is his advice for any new executive walking into a leadership position. Men almost always prefer to walk in paths marked out by others and patterns their actions through imitation. A prudent man should always follow the footsteps of the great and imitate those who have been supreme. A prince should read history and reflect on the actions of great men. So what do you think Machiavelli is saying here about executives? So when you first walk into a position, what is he saying is the best way to be when you first start? And if you think about it, he's really saying, look at what was done already and kind of follow along, right? Look at what other people have tried to do. Try to get to know the culture and the systems that already exist. And if it's working, copy those, do those things that are already tested and proven. So you may want to make sure that you really take the time to follow in the footsteps of people that are successful in what they're doing. And that takes reflection. You have to really stop and think about what is being done and what is good and what's not good, and make adjustments if it's something that's not working. Be willing to adjust to something new that is working. So that's your word for this week. It's Machiavelli. So make sure you write it down and send it to me as your keyword for this lecture. Sorry, we don't have a keyword in this class. I'm getting juvenile justice and this confused. Sorry, no keyword. You don't have to send me anything. I'm sorry. So Machiavelli, this is his theory. I'm all confused. Okay. Now, how you react to a new position may depend on if you're promoted from within or you competed for the position. If you're promoted from within, you already were working in the organization. You already know all the people that work there. You know the structure, you know the style, you know how it's working. So you may not want to try to immediately implement radical changes because you're new. So anybody that's new may not want to make radical changes right away, unless the organization is in complete shambles and it's not functioning properly, then you may have to. But you want to remember the culture and the traditions and the good things. You're already there. You've already done half the work. You know the assessment. You know how it's working. So then you can try to focus on the good things and keep those in place and try to start slowly refining the things that need improvement. Now, when you compete for a position from outside and you're joining the organization for the first time, it's a little different because you don't know the culture, you don't know the people, you don't know the organization. So you're going to have to spend a significant amount of time first before you make any changes in sort of assessing who's there and who are the people and getting to know them. You also may want to start building alliances because when you do make changes, you want people that are going to agree with your changes and support your changes. Otherwise, you could have mass rebellion about everybody against you. So figure out who people are, learn who people are, form these alliances, work with people, and figure out where you stand, okay? Enjoy the honeymoon period. You usually get a little bit of a honeymoon period. People cut you a break because you're still trying to learn. Use that to gather as much information as you can about that organization. Be open to people. Let people come in your office and tell you about what they think and what they knew. Ask for advice. Don't be so arrogant that you are going to come in and know everything and change everything. Spend some time getting to know your organization. Okay, so whether you're chosen from outside or within, it could really change how you act when you first get the position. So I just think this is interesting. It's the 10 commandments for police executives. When you first get a job, these are the 10 things that you should focus on. Practice what you preach. So if you want officers to do something, you need to do it yourself. You need to be the model for certain behavior. You need to lead by example. So if you're telling officers they have to follow certain rules, you have to follow them yourself. A day's pay for a day and a half of work. So work hard. So just because you're the executor doesn't mean that you can just do half-day work and leave when you want. You should actually work harder than everybody else because you are the example for everybody. Maintain proper integrity and promote integrity. So make sure you have your ethical principles and stand by them, and only promote people that follow the same ethical principles that you believe in. Develop a positive image. You want your organization to be run on a positive note. Remain committed and dedicated to your job with your attitude and everything. Be respectful to the people you work for. You don't want to be authoritarian and dictating to everybody. Accept assistance and teamwork. Use teamwork and allow people to integrate their own ideas and concepts. Be eager for knowledge. Try to learn. Don't act like you know everything and you can just control everything. Be willing to accept new ideas and work with people on new concepts. Maintain a healthy lifestyle. We know that law enforcement is an extremely stressful position, and one of the things that helps is exercise and eating and taking care of yourself. You, again, are a role model for the rest of the organization. You want your officers to stay healthy and productive, so exhibit that healthy lifestyle and set personal goals. So just because you're the boss doesn't mean that you can't constantly strive to improve yourself. So set goals for yourself and constantly try to achieve those goals. Never just settle for where you are. Okay, so that's the lecture for today. Now you have your homework. So your homework is going to require you to create an assessment tool. So you have to think about the 5 most important traits that you think a chief executive would have and the 5 most important skills. Okay. So there's a chart you're going to fill out and you're going to list those 5 things for each category down the side. Then what you're going to do is I have posted resumes. You're going to look at the resumes that I posted and you're going to assess each candidate based on the traits and the skills that you have chosen. Okay, so you're going to rank them. You're going to give them a score on each of the traits and skills that you have chosen as the most important. And then you're going to decide, who did you pick? So out of the different candidates, which one are you going to pick? Okay. So after that, what did you think about the process? Did you like this process? Was it helpful? Do you think this is a good way to try to hire a chief executive for law enforcement? And other than the traits and skills that I gave you, what other things would you want to know about the chief executive prior to hiring? If it didn't fit in your chart, what else do you think would be really important? Okay, so that's your homework for chapter 5. So make sure you get that done and look at the resumes and fill it out and answer the questions. What we'll do in the next lecture, we're going to look at specific positions. We're going to actually look at the sheriff's position and the chief of police position and compare and contrast how they exist. We'll talk about middle management. We'll talk about the different positions within the department. Okay, and then we'll finish up with police personnel and roles and duties. And then next week we move on to specific police problems and issues, contemporary police issues. So hope that was good. We will, don't forget, I'm posting another video on phase 4. Phase 4 gets tricky because it's something that you've probably never done before. So make sure you spend the time to watch my video on phase 4 so you understand what we're going to do. So I'll see you soon for the second part.